And she said something really, really, really powerful to me. She said, "How are you doing?" I said, terrible. I blew it. And she said, "Okay, well, you can look at it like that, or you can just say that this is a bump in the road. Me personally, I'm going to ask you to take 3 days, go through whatever emotions you have to go through, then dust yourself off and figure this out, because we got a long life in front of us."
Welcome to Empowering Leadership, a podcast from Dorrier Underwood. Join us as we explore new perspectives on leadership and discover what it takes to be effective as a leader. Here's your host, Doug McVadon.
Can't wait for you to meet my guest today on the Empowering Leadership podcast. Brad King will tell us about his business experience, and among other things, you'll learn why you have to keep practicing those left-handed layups and what's the secret to hanging wallpaper. Join us after this. My guest today on the Empowering Leadership podcast is Brad King. Welcome, Brad.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate you having me.
Brad is a longtime client of ours at Dorrier Underwood. And so there's so many places, Brad, that we could start our conversation today. And I think the best place is to start with right now. And what you're up to right now is a company called Stitch Golf, and you've been working with Jane Smith and the Dorrier Underwood team a little bit. Why don't we start right there? What is Stitch Golf? And then we can work backwards from there.
Yeah, great. So Stitch Golf is probably the fastest growing, most exciting golf brand in the industry in the United States right now. And I say that not being boastful, but I say that because it's actually true. It's been documented and said by a lot of the affiliates that we work with, Golf Digest, golf.com, Golf WRX, a whole bunch of folks that are in the industry. And why are they saying that? They're saying that because we're doing something that's very unique in the industry. Most of the players that are in this industry are either golf club manufacturers, golf bag manufacturers, travel gear manufacturers, apparel manufacturers. We're actually doing golf bags, travel gear, and apparel all in one, which is pretty unique in this industry. Most people would say, why in the world would you do that to yourself? Well, through studying the industry, we saw that it was the only way to kind of disrupt the industry. And so when we decided to do this and buy this company 4.5 years ago, that was Stitch Golf, that is now the new and revised and new and improved Stitch Golf. We decided to actually go to market a little bit differently than the company was being taken to market before.
It might sound like we're going to spend a lot of time talking about golf, or that this is a show about golf almost. But, you know, and I was going to say, I'm sure I could get you going pretty easily in that direction. However, people would be mistaken if they thought that you were all about golf career-wise, wouldn't they?
You know, Doug, you and I, prior to this, we talked about the long and winding road. And yes, it is not all about golf. That's for sure.
Yeah, and this is just the latest company and the latest place that you've sought to fulfill a certain kind of vision. Isn't that right? So why don't you take us back to where you started this long and winding road, as you put it?
Yeah, no, glad to do that. You know, it's interesting preparing for this today on my walk this morning. I was really thinking a lot about that. And, you know, I think about what were the things that were kind of meaningful early on and when did they happen? Well, I have to go even back to being a child and being encouraged by parents to dream and not being discouraged to dream. But actually being encouraged to do so. And, you know, was lucky enough to have a girlfriend back when I was a teenager that is now my wife of 35 years, who also encouraged that as well. I would say that she was not one of those that basically was pushing me to dream and throw caution to the wind, but she really knew that that's who I was. And I think for her, it was more an encouragement to dream because she knew it was going to be the one thing that would make me happy. And so she always, and still to this day, she basically, if you were to ask her, what does success look like? Success and happiness are one and the same.
Tell us her name and a little about this woman.
Yeah, her name is Dina. We met when she was 13 and I was 15. It's the strangest thing. I was in ninth grade at the time, had a buddy. We were sitting in a science class, a biology class, and he invited me to go to an NC State basketball game with him that night because there was this blonde whose parents were concessionaires. They ran a concession booth at Reynolds Coliseum in Raleigh. And he couldn't get the courage up to speak to her. So he said, I know that you're not afraid to talk to people. So go with me and I want to meet this girl. Long story short, he still didn't get the courage up. I did. We started talking. And the quick and skinny story on this is she was in the booth, the concession booth, at a desk doing her homework. And I invited her to come out of the booth. And she had one of her school books. And so I flipped the book open and her name was Dina Price. And so obviously I knew her name and we had some conversation. We left. At the end of the game, I'm sitting there in the seats and her family are leaving near the end of the ball game to walk out and go home. And I chased her and I yelled at her and said, hey, Dina, what is your dad's name? And she kind of looked at me and threw her hands up and said, Jesse, why? I said, I'll call you. Well, those were the days back when you had phone books and you could easily look up Jesse Price. And luckily enough, I opened the phone book up and there were two of them. The first one I called was a guy that ran a salvage yard, an auto salvage yard. And he hung up on me. And so the second one I called was actually the proper one. And I got to be on the phone with Dina shortly thereafter. And that was in 1980. So 41 years ago. So what's so special about that, though, is that could have not happened.
Right.
And this conversation would be completely different. But I'm a believer that things happen for a reason if you give them an opportunity. And if you're not fearful to, when you see something that's presenting itself as an opportunity, that you should just go and chase it.
And so after meeting Dina and your life changed in that way, what was your entry into the business world? It's
a great question. So graduated high school, went to college for 2 years at Campbell University, transferred to NC State in engineering because Campbell was a private school. It was very expensive. I had been working for a convenience store franchise chain to put myself through college and have some dating money and car gas money and all. And but it was too expensive. Didn't really love it. Thought I wanted to be a lawyer, was really good at math, could transfer to NC State. It was going to be a lot less expensive. And I thought, well, I could probably breeze through engineering school. So transferred to engineering school and it was an easy transition. It was very easy for me, but I didn't enjoy it. And I found myself at a really critical time, kind of near the end of my college life. And I'm sitting at a drafting table back in the days before CAD drawings, where you actually would sit down at a drafting table and hand draw bridge designs and roadway designs and those types of things. And I thought to myself, if I have to do this the rest of my life, I am going to be an absolute miserable soul. And, so I left and, kind of had come to that conclusion. I don't want to do this the rest of my life, but I'm going to finish out what I've got in front of me. I called Dina and told her how I felt. And she said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be in business. She goes, well, what are you thinking? I said, well, I work for this convenience store franchise chain. They have franchises that come available from time to time. I'm going to go over and speak with them and see if I can get on the list. So I did. And I drove over and I said, hey, listen, this is what I want to do post school. If a franchise becomes available, would you please put me on the list to call? And they said, we actually have one available right now. So I'm not ready right now. I haven't finished school yet. They said, well, it's available now. We don't know when the next one will be available. I said, I want it. Which kicked off a whole series of conversations.
So let me get this straight. You bought a franchise before you were out of college.
Correct. I never finished college.
Okay.
This decision, it preempted everything. And because it had to happen then. It was then, or it may be years. And I so passionately wanted to go after something that I truly was passionate about, which was understanding business. And I wanted to understand all the dynamics. I was challenged by it because I knew very little about it. And, I went home and told my parents what I wanted to do, and they vigorously tried to talk me out of it. my dad said, how much is this franchise going to cost, Brad? I said, Dad, it's $55,000. He said, well, where are you going to get the money? I said, well, Dad, I was kind of hoping that you might consider a little loan. He said, listen, Mr. Businessman, if you want to be a true businessman, then you go and borrow the money from a bank like every other businessman. So I went to 4 banks and was turned down. I went to a 5th bank and they agreed to loan me the money.
Wow.
And so I borrowed the $55,000. I bought the franchise. Tina and I got married and we were in business. And it was really incredible. I learned so much. I learned balance sheet, cash flow, maintenance, deferred maintenance, employees and HR, cost of goods, margin, everything. I learned so much. But the most powerful thing about that experience, which lasted for 4.5 years, was that it ended as a failure. And it was painful because it was actually, I couldn't imagine it failing. Everything was going perfectly. But I learned my biggest first lesson in business, which was this term, and you're very familiar with it, a blind spot. Which I had never really even thought about blind spots in business. But one hit me, and it hit me right in the back of the head. The Department of Transportation decided to redo the intersection in front of this business, and it collapsed the traffic flow of the business. And it happened very, very fast.
And you didn't realize how dependent you were on that external factor.
I should have.
Right. But it wasn't on your radar screen, though.
No.
That's what you mean by a blind spot. It was right there. It was right there in plain sight, but you could look right at it and not see it as an issue or as a threat.
It's exactly that, Doug. In fact, convenience stores, they're full of glass. I was sitting there staring at the intersection every day of my life all day.
Yeah.
And never even thought about it might change.
Yeah. It's not a blind spot if you can actually see it. It's a blind spot if you can look right at it and still not see it.
Correct. And that's what it was.
Wow.
But boy, oh boy, when the tractors unloaded on that property, did it hit me. And this time it didn't hit me in the back of the head. It actually hit me right in the nose.
Yeah. So, well, before we get into that, there's this theme that I hear in the background about timing.
Yeah.
You really have developed a point of view based on your experience about the need to jump when the time is right. And I could really feel that parental pull to no, you got to finish school. You put all this time in. I mean, everything would be on that side of it. And you would be saying, no, we got to get it now. So tell me about that sense you have of needing to jump, needing to go when the time is right. Like your life is a lot about that, isn't it?
No, it's been nothing but that. My wife refers to it as the roller coaster ride that we've been on for 41 years.
Okay.
And it's got twists and turns and you don't know when to get on and when to get off. But really, so from a timing perspective, it's always been about what's my gut instinct, and just going with it, not knowing what the possible outcome could be. But if it feels like it's something I need to take action on, just take action. Don't put it off. Don't procrastinate. I'm not a procrastinator. And in fact, I would say I'm even better at it now than I was back then, because I've learned that being paralyzed through indecision is more painful than making a bad decision.
So is that what drives it? The sort of fear that you're going to miss the moment if you don't act?
It's more that I'm going to be left with a question of what if. I'd prefer not to have that question. I'd really just love to run down the road and just do everything in my power to make it work, knowing that there's probably a coin toss possibility that it may not work. I liken it. It's interesting, Doug, because I liken it to, I've always loved to coach sports back, and I used to coach my daughter who played sports, and I really have always enjoyed coaching. And one of the things I remember, it just is vivid as we're having this part of the conversation. When my daughter was in middle school, I'm coaching middle school girls basketball, and I'm making these girls do left-handed layups. Mm-hmm. And over and over and over again, they are failing at these left-handed layups. And my daughter, who somewhat filterless when it comes to me as a dad, a little bit more of a filter when she's talking to me as a coach, said, "Coach, can you please tell me why you continue to ask us to do left-handed layups when we can't do them?" I said, "Because you have to keep doing them and failing at them until you quit failing. And I'm going to make you keep doing it until you actually can do it. And then the failure will be a piece of scar tissue that just exists in the past. And if you use it, truly, it can propel you into doing some incredible things. But you have to go through the process of failing." And I really, look, that all sounds, sometimes it sounds hocus pocus even when I say it, but I tell myself that to convince myself of it.
Let's stay with the narrative for a second, Brad. So then, to your point, you did fail after 4.5 years, and in that moment, were you thinking, "This is so great because I'll have such a learning experience from it"? So tell what happened then.
I was crushed. We had just built a brand new house, and my wife was working at the time. We didn't have any children. I remember the day where I'm selling the business back to the franchise company. I remember thinking, okay, this is going to work out. I'm going to leave here relatively debt-free because they'll pay me for the inventory and the equipment, and I'll walk away and I'll just be starting at ground zero. But on that day, they decided to pay me 50 cents on the dollar, which left me in a very different situation than I went into that day, which was full of emotion. I left there with not only the emotion of the day, but the financial burden of the day. And interestingly enough, I had a pickup truck. I drove a pickup truck then because I'm in the convenience store business. I'm driving and picking up eggs and oil and stuff like that. Yeah. I sold my truck that day along with the business and walk out the door after closing the transaction to sell it back to the franchise company and realized I don't have a vehicle. I'd forgotten. I was in such an emotional state. I didn't realize or had forgotten that I sold my vehicle that morning. And so I take off with my empty personal checkbook, my empty business checkbook, and I walked to our house, which was a little over 4 miles away. And I can still remember every step. I remember it perfectly. And that was in 1991. So
they're really embedded in your memory, that failure, that long walk home, very literally.
It absolutely did. And it was almost like as I'm walking, cars are passing and I'm thinking, they can tell I failed. These people are driving by. They can sense there's something wrong with me. I've failed.
Wow.
And I got home, walked into this new home and collapsed in the foyer. And that's where my wife found me when she came home from work that day. And she said something really, really, really powerful to me. She said, "How are you doing?" I said, terrible. I blew it. And she said, "Okay, well, you can look at it like that, or you can just say that this is a bump in the road. Me personally, I'm going to ask you to take 3 days, go through whatever emotions you have to go through, then dust yourself off and figure this out because we got a long life in front of us."
Wow. There's an inspirational story. Yeah. I can see why you are still with her.
No doubt. And it's, but I will tell you, and if you ask me, would I trade any of that, the pain, the scar tissue, the failure, the walk home, those steps, all those emotional feelings, would I trade it for the learning? Like, would I give up the learning to not have to have gone through that? I can tell you honestly today, no. I'm glad that it happened the way that it did because I'm glad that I got the learning from it. And I did.
And so then what did you do? Because I know that you ended up in several other situations. I don't know if you want to tell us your whole story because, we might have to do parts 2 and 3 of our podcast but yeah, if you can, I think that's great because where you got to a point where it wasn't just you as an entrepreneur. It was you as a leader of a company.
Well, I got there, but I'm in survival mode at this point because my wife has basically said she believed in me, figure it out. We've got a life in front of us. And she was right. So what I did, flipping through the newspaper, saw that they were teaching a wallpaper hanging class. I went to this class, learned to hang wallpaper, started hanging wallpaper, built a wallpaper hanging business that actually ended up turning into a business where we were serving Baskin Robbins, an old chain called Casual Corner, built a wallpaper hanging business. And it was purely to survive and make income to pay for the debts that I had left over from the failed business, but also to be a contributor to our family. That kind of bled over into window coverings. And we added a dimension that included blinds for commercial buildings, draperies that we put in at the Performing Arts Center in downtown Raleigh, to plantation shutter business. And it was actually a fun and exciting process that I went through. And to be very
what was the name of that company?
Well, there were multiple companies. So there was a service business that was basically just King Installations, but then there was Blind Shutters and Shades, which was the drapery aspect of it. And look, it was a lifestyle business. That's what it was. It was not a what I call a value creation business. It was a lifestyle business, and frankly, parenthetically, I would call it was a survival business. It was whatever I needed to do to be a contributor to my family's needs, and have no regrets of that either. Learned a lot from that, and worked really hard. It was physical at times. It eventually got easier as it progressed, and I had more people helping. But then I had this fortunate person that I met playing golf one day, who was working for a office products company in Raleigh, and he said, "Hey, I really like you. Enjoyed being on the golf course with you. If you're ever thinking about getting in the office products industry, think you'd be great at it." And I thought, you know what? I'm traveling a lot. My wife now is pregnant with our first child. It's 1995 now. This is 4 years removed from my first business failure. I need to be at home with this new child. So I'll sell the business and go and talk with these guys. Long story short, I went to work for them, sold the business, and got into selling office products. Found that I was great at it. I really was. And I say that not braggadociously, but I was really, really good at it. And I worked hard, and I had a very strong commitment to outperform everyone else. The company was a family-run business that was purchased by a publicly traded roll-up that introduced me to the whole world of mergers and acquisitions. I became part of a national sales team and then a deal team at the same time, and participated in 440 acquisitions in 3 years. Wow. And it was, something I knew nothing about, but boy, did I learn fast, which led to me getting back to my roots where, okay, this has been great, but I want to work for Brad again. And I want to build something, and I want to create something, and I want to build a team. And so in 2000, after, again, it seems like these things go in these 4.5-year stints. In 2000, I left that company and gave up my income, and had my wife agree that we could live off of now our new nest egg, for me to start this new company called Loan Source, which I launched in August of 2000. Carry this story forward and kind of do it in efficient time. That company 13 years later was 200 employees, 9 distribution centers, 70 trucks, $63 million a year in revenue. And I sold it almost 13 years to the day to Staples, which was the company that I used to work for when they did the roll-up.
Isn't that great? And so with Loan Source, and of course, that's when I got to know you during the Loan Source period, and we were working with you and your leadership teams. It had become a much bigger set of concerns than the initial survival concerns when you were hanging wallpaper. You now, so talk to me about what your transformation was from, just doing whatever you had to do to make a contribution to your family, to seeing what kind of difference you're going to make as a businessman and as a company.
Great. It's interesting. Up until that point, I had put my own personal money and my family's money, my income. That was the epicenter of my exposure. But when I did Loan Source, I needed additional capital, so I took friends and family capital in. So I had other people's money in there. And when you got other people's money involved in a business, it's different. It has to be different. I'd never done it before. So, but I definitely felt different. It was very powerful to have people say, I believe in you and I'm willing to hand you an investment check. But along with that comes a huge amount of responsibility to not only produce great results in a great company and a great team that does incredible things, but to also produce value for that person that made the investment in you.
Yeah,
and it truly, it took me a while to get used to that. It really did. It's actually, so that was 2000, and I started working with Doria Underwood in 2004. We were named one of the Fast 50 companies in the Triangle, the Research Triangle Park. And that's when I met Jane.
That's when you got on our radar screen, because we noticed those companies. Yeah. And they're usually dealing with some fairly consistent issues that involve, what I ask you about your own transformation as a leader and what you had to change in your perspective in order to be effective.
Yeah. And I think the first change was just understanding the fact that the Brad that I had been up to that point was not going to be the most efficient Brad to take that company to where it needed to go.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I fought that. I can't even imagine. I say that now and it's almost like, really? But yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm being very honest about it. I fought it because I thought, no, you've got this, Brad. You've figured out so many things in life. You can figure this out. But I will tell you, there was a very powerful conversation that I had with Jane that really turned the corner for me. And she just kept harping on the word commitment. What are you committed to? Tell me your commitment for this company. That word commitment, it's like, oh my gosh, kept slapping me in the face. And it's like, I wanted to hey, stop slapping me in the face with this word commitment.
Yes.
And then I finally said, you know what? That's a very, very powerful thing. And you've got my mind twisted into spaghetti mess. So there's something here. I want to explore it and I'm open to it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was that critical. That word was that powerfully critical to me.
Well, yeah. And it's also the question for all of us. What are we committed to ultimately? What do we want to be known for? What do we want our legacy to be? And before that, it really does seem like the question is not that. The question is, what do I need to do to survive and get ahead?
For sure.
And when you realize that that's short-sighted, if that's all you're ever looking at, right, that you're not going to fulfill your goals. Yeah.
And I think, look, I mean, is it perfectly fine for people to exist in this world and they stay in that survival mode their whole life? Yeah, that's their choice. That's what they've made it basically either.
Or sometimes not a choice. Sometimes people have to deal with their survival so much in their face that they don't have that opportunity of the choice. I think that's one of the things that you've realized in your journey is you have the opportunity to have that question of what you're going to, right? What you're going to do with yourself.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. I'm not going to sit here and, kid anybody and say it's easy. But I will say this, I've tried to my entire life, make it look easy to the outside world. and it's Jane used to tell me so much. Yeah, Brad, it's like putting on the mask. And it really is like that because, there's a prideful element to this. And I'm a prideful person. I don't want to be overly vulnerable in every situation. I just don't want to be. And so for that reason, I tend to try and make it look easy, even though I know it's never been easy. And it still to this day isn't easy.
Well, and to that point, that's what makes leadership hard is that you have to get yourself out of the way. And, some of the things that you want to pay attention to, you find out, well, great, but that's just not effective. That's not paying attention to what other people need, and so say a little bit about that, about some of your kind of rude awakenings as you went to the larger level. After 2004, you were growing so rapidly that you really had to deal with yourself. Like, who are you? It became not who you are to yourself. Like your version of you is sort of like, who cares? It's like, we just want to know how you come across in a big meeting or to a group or to outside investors. So just talk to me a little bit about that process for
Yeah,
you?
I think up to that point, I had somewhat operated under the mindset that I had to have every answer. I had to make every decision. I had to be very, very clear about those decisions. And you're the soldiers, and these are the marching orders. The transformation that happened was I had to get better at asking questions. I had to get better at pushing other people to put themselves out there, and make decisions and own either the positive and successful results from that or the failures from it. But more importantly, it's like, okay, success or failure is fine, but keep forward motion and get them to own the fact that we're outcomes driven as a company. You should be focused on being outcomes driven as a person. I need for you to do that because I need outcomes. But more importantly, don't be paralyzed by making a decision because of fear of failure. Be more afraid of being paralyzed by indecision. And from my perspective, the quicker I conveyed that to a broader audience, that I don't want you to make stupid decisions, but I'm perfectly fine if you make a decision that you have conviction for and it turns out bad, as long as we hug each other and then you go fix it. And that happened over and over and over again. And it got to a point where the company, was I an integral part of it? Of course. But was there a broader team that was making decisions, having successes, making mistakes, having failures? Absolutely. And we just kept stair-stepping that business.
It's really great. The part, let me interrupt you there to underline that part about over and over and over again, that kept happening. And that's, why we named this podcast Empowering Leadership. It turns out that's the key thing that someone in your position, as you just described, has to master as a skill, like how to empower the leadership, how to get that other person to say, I am making the call. I am making this recommendation and we're moving ahead and we're doing it because I say so, not because somebody else approved of it or because I think you might like me better, but because it's my responsibility and I've evaluated the situation and made a decision. And, it sounds so simple for us to say it, in a podcast, but that is the fundamental dilemma for people is having that feeling or being able to give that feeling, right? That they can act. Yeah.
And you make a great point. I mean, one of the things that, we haven't really talked about, but I truly I appreciate the fact that it takes a variety of personalities to build anything, whether it be a sports franchise, a business. It takes a variety of personalities. If you have one-dimensional, same personality in all functional areas of a business, you're probably going to have a one-dimensional business. And the outcomes from that are going to be probably one-dimensional. But when you can bring a variety of personalities together, knowing that some of those people just naturally through their personality profiling have a leadership profile, they're perfectly fine taking charge, they're perfectly fine taking risks, they're perfectly fine putting themselves out there. And then you've got other people on that same leadership team that are very risk averse, very hesitant to put themselves out there. They want to be right. They want to be perfect. They don't want to have failure. They don't want to make mistakes. And if you can take that combination of those different personalities and actually have them embrace the concept that you as a leader, you want them to actually push themselves. You want them to put themselves out there. In fact, like doing left-handed layups, you're okay with them failing at it because at some point they're going to turn a curve. And you're not going to kick them out because of failure. No, actually, you're going to encourage them even more because they're putting themselves out there so that the possibility of failure exists. They don't like it. You don't like it, but you know that it's part of the process. And I will tell you, Doug, it's probably the most rewarding thing that I ever deal with. The most rewarding thing that I deal with is that seeing those people that turn that corner, that I know their profiles because I profile everybody. I've been profiling for 20 years using a program called DISC. I know what their profiles are. I know what their natural tendencies are, but to see them overcome it, and then to see the ones that have the actual natural leadership, like the natural ability to make decisions, not be afraid. They're fearless, but to see them actually push themselves even further, like put themselves out there even more. Why? Because they know that they don't have to worry about me coming down on them and saying, what the heck are you doing? No, actually do more of it. Do more of it.
One of those fundamental dilemmas for a human being, right, is when to give up what we've done to look good in the past, risk doing something that could make us look bad.
Yes.
In the short term, right? Doesn't it really come down to that?
For sure it does. Absolutely. And we all want to look good. I mean, who really can stand up and say, you know what, I really want to look bad? Nobody.
Except if it makes you look good to say that.
Well, that's true.
And sometimes it does. Sometimes say, well, I just got to call it on myself. And they're doing that because it looks really good, like they look really brave or bold or something, so which is still
takes on a different look.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same drive underneath, to look good and be right, like to justify your point of view. And what you're saying is that the real value comes from when you see that you failed, that you thought this was going to work and it actually didn't. What you thought was going to work did not work. Okay. Yep. And just like deal with that. Now stop talking about, but I thought, we don't care anymore. Your idea was wrong. Okay. And it did not pan out. So now it's incumbent upon you as a human being, unless you're just going to curl up in your shell and not come out and not talk to anybody, to make something of that, of that failure. And every great person that's ever interviewed or had a biography written about them has invariably pointed to some disappointment or setback as being the ultimate key to their success. What do you think about your early setbacks or even your recent failures have taught you the most?
I would say from the early failure was really, I'll go back to the blind spot. I'm very, now I look for blind spots. Before, I didn't even really know they existed. I knew what a blind spot was in a car. My dad would say, hey, we're driving down the highway and we're going to the beach and there's a car in my blind spot. I know I can just sense that he's there. Brad, look over the shoulder and see if you see a car in my blind spot. And I completely understood the concept, but in business, I did not understand the concept. In fact, so much so that I really, it wasn't even a part of my thought process. Now that I've been through that and been what I would say stung by it, mm-hmm. It is a part of my process. I'm constantly looking at it. Having we had a major fraud at Loan Source, a significant fraud from someone in finance that stole a significant amount of money. Again, it was another blind spot moment at a time where I thought, man, I am so keen to looking at the blind spots. What you realize is that you never quit learning the blind spot game. You never quit learning it. There are layers and layers and layers of it, and you're never going to be perfect at it because perfection doesn't exist. It's a blind spot. But I would say that's one. The second thing is, I've said this many times. I say it to my wife. She looks at me and she says, Brad, I really wish you would quit saying that. But I wake up every day with a fear, a personal fear of failure. And it's so interesting. I had this moment this past weekend. I was helping my mother. My father passed away coming up on 4 years ago. And we're still trying to help my mom go through this process of resettling. Yes. And so I'm over working in her garage to kind of help her get things cleaned up. And as I'm leaving to take stuff to the thrift store and to the dump for her, she says, hey, Brad, I've got something that you're going to want to hang on your wall in your office. I said, okay. I said, what is it, Mom? She hands me a copy of my kindergarten diploma. I said, well, Mom, thanks. I appreciate that. I pulled my phone out. I took a picture of it and I put it in the go to the trash pile. Mm-hmm. She said, you're going to throw that away? You're not going to hang that on your wall? I said, Mom, look, I know, that I wake up every day with this fear of failure as I keep pushing. It's like, it's part of like who I am. But I will tell you, of all the things that I've accomplished in my life, if my kindergarten diploma makes it up there with all the other things, like the businesses that have been created, the people that have been enriched and empowered, if this is in the same world as that, then something is really off. So I have to take this to the dump because it's not even in the same league. And she said, yeah, when you put it like that, I guess I agree with you. So, it's, I look at it like that. And, I'm 57 years old, Doug, and I dream. I'm a dreamer. I've been a dreamer since I was young. And that's the other thing that I think is probably the most powerful thing. I've become an even better dreamer because I try not to put too many parameters around my dreams. I used to dream inside the context of what was possible, but now it's like, okay, I'll put possible and what may say highly unattainable in the same category, and it doesn't in any way keep me from dreaming about it.
Well, now, that makes you unusual, that you're able to keep such a bright vision for yourself while waking up every day being afraid of failure. Right. Because you don't see that as a paradox, do you?
No, I don't. I think they have to coexist. They do. They coexist. And it's not in any way to put parameters around the dreams. It's to keep me focused. And again, keep me focused on, okay, the dream is kind of it's the starting point. It's like everything emanates from what you create in your head. But from then, what happens? Does it just exist as this thought, this thing that just exists in vapor? Or do you actually make a plan to take action on it? And the first fear of failure is making the decision whether to take action on the dream.
Yeah.
It's like, do you or don't you? And I try and push myself through that first barrier and say, okay, I know I've got this fear of failure, but push through it anyway.
Well, I heard it even a different way, Brad. I heard that you actually take the feedback that you get. Because one of the things I've learned in my journey is to take that you do get the feedback. People say, well, no one ever told me. Yes, they did. They told you by it either worked or it didn't work. And so that whole thing about the $55,000, that it took $55,000, you were told you can't do that. I'm your father and I'm not going to give it to you.
Yep.
Well, for most people, it would be over right there. It would be over right there. I thought about it. I asked my dad. He said he wasn't going to do it. And I don't know anybody else with that kind of money. End of story. Okay. And they would forget the part. They would forget the part that their dad had also said to them, which is, if you're really got a good idea, you do what any regular business person would do, not a high school kid, but any businessman. You'd go to the bank and you'd ask. And but you even did that. You did that 4 times. And it didn't work. And so you went to the 5th bank. Like you took the feedback, I think I wouldn't want you to step over that in your story, because that kind of both taking it in as, you hear what I mean? Like going to the bank would be an answer that an adult would give to a kid to tell them you can't do that. They could hear that as, oh, well, that's something adults do that I've never done. And therefore, the fact that he's saying that what you do is you go to the bank is his way of saying you can't do that, kid. And you didn't hear it that way. You heard it as, oh, thank you for telling me the way that happens. Now I will do it that way because now I've learned that that's the way that happens.
Interestingly enough, and you're spot on, interestingly enough, I told my dad, I'm going to go to 3 banks. If 3 banks tell me no, then I will stop this. So I went to the 3rd bank, and obviously they told me no. And Dad said, okay, so I guess this idea is over. I said, actually, I've got an appointment with a 4th bank. So I went to the 4th bank and they said no. Dad said, okay, so are you done with this now? I said, I've got one more I want to try. And the 5th one said yes. And when they said yes, I came home and told my dad, and he was in disbelief, but he was so proud at the same time.
Yeah.
And he said to me, this is what he said. He said, I knew you weren't going to stop after 3. Wow. That's what he said. And the truth is, I knew I wasn't going to stop after 3 too.
Well, it sounds like that man really knew you. He didn't know where you were going, but he knew you. That's really exciting.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He was an incredible influence, and he was very encouraging. And once it all started, he was right there with me. And through the Lone Source days, through this business, when I decided to buy this business. And of course, he died, coming up on 4 years ago. So he died right after we bought this business.
But he knew about your success, and he knew about you really making it work. And he knew all the way back to that 55,000. That's really wonderful. So often the fathers don't get to be there for the success of the sons. So that's wonderful to hear that completion.
Yeah, it was a prideful moment for him and for me. And, but I will say this, it's, one good thing happens, it comes to a conclusion, and then you move to something else. And I remember early on, I went to Dorier Underwood's mastery class, and I remember the quote. It said, and I'll misquote this, it's in my folder, I still have it, talked about the power of the dreamers of the day. And, I'm going to paraphrase here, but be very, very interested in the people that are the dreamers at night. And, that basically dream all the time is basically.
Actually, it's the other way around.
Oh, yes. The dreamers of night.
Normally everybody dreams at night. But beware the dreamers of the day, because they'll make it happen. T.E. Lawrence. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. And I've got it written down, and I remember that my takeaway from that, there was one word: that dreaming's okay.
Yeah.
And, and so I do dream, and I share them and I speak them. And that was another thing that came out of that was really powerful. It's dreaming is one thing, but when you actually speak it to someone else, it starts to take on a life. And so over the years, I've become much quicker at sharing the dreams, like speaking them, trying to give them some life, breathing some life into them.
That's great. Well, I have one final question to ask you that maybe you can enlighten all of us about, since you were a successful entrepreneur in this area. What is the secret to hanging wallpaper?
Making sure that you hang it right side up. And I say that because the first job that I did was for my mother and father-in-law, and it was a bathroom. And I went over and I hung the wallpaper, and I stepped back after I was done, and I was so proud. It looked so great. And then I realized I had hung it all completely upside down. So I had to completely redo it. So I would say the number one key is making sure that you hang it right side up.
And we think you can get all the lessons you need for managing people and owning a business out of that one little anecdote.
I think it's appropriate.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Brad, for being on the podcast with us today, and for all the good work that you have done and continue to do. And best of luck to you and your people at Stitch Golf and everywhere in your life.
Well, Doug, I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for Dorier Underwood. I'm grateful for all of the teaching and all of the learning that I've gotten from my relationship. And I look forward to many more years of it.
Well, thank you very much. And we should also acknowledge Dina for the obviously crucial role that she's played in this whole journey.
She is absolutely the star for sure.
Thank you for listening to Empowering Leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to subscribe for free on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a rating and a review so that other leaders like yourself can find us. Sign up for Dorier Underwood's email newsletter by visiting us at dorierunderwood.com. Dorier Underwood serves visionary companies who are serious about realizing their dreams and who are unwilling to settle for incremental results. Our clients are looking for breakthrough results and a deeper sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. To learn more, visit us at dorierunderwood.com. That's it for now. Go forth and be amazing and take good care of your people. Empowering Leadership is produced by Dorier Underwood and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.